Homo heidelbergensis were the first prehistoric humans whose brain size is equal to what we have now. Although their faces were savage, their eyes shone with the renewed light of reason. They built shelters and buried their dead, and created the first objects of art, as crude as they were. All this happened 800,000 years ago. 40,000 years ago, woolly mammoths, steppe bison, and other large mammals roamed alongside people across Eurasia. Tens of thousands of years later, we get a glimpse into this Ice Age world. Some of the most elaborate prehistoric artwork exists in caves in France, known as Grotte de Lascaux and Chauvet-Pont d'Arc, dating as far back as 65,000 years ago. Scholars have debated the meaning and purpose of cave art for centuries. Some scholars think that cave paintings were created by shamans, who would go deep into caves and enter a trance-like state, drawing animals they encountered in the spirit world. Why we may never know with absolute certainty why cave art was made, these works give us insight into the evolving minds of our prehistoric ancestors. Their detailed drawings may teach us about the appearance and behaviour of animals that have long been extinct. But perhaps more significant, they reveal a part of our never-ending quest to find out more about ourselves and where we. Did you know that once upon a time humans used to live with hobbits? Midway between Asia and Australia, here in Indonesia lies the island of Flores. For centuries, the people of Flores told the story of little hairy people who lurk deep in the forest. These hobbits used to come up to the village and raid their crops, until one day they stole a baby, and that was it. The villagers decided to chase them out of their cave, which is the last of what they'd called Ebu Gogo, which is translated as grandmother who eats everything. Ebu Gogo was dismissed as folklore, but in 2003, Australian archaeologists digging in Flores discovered something simply astounding. At first, they thought it was a young child. The individual was about the size of a modern 3-year-old, but then they looked more closely. This was no child. In 2010, a new species of human was discovered. From the single finger bone of a child found deep within the Altai Mountains, scientists had discovered a new member of the human family tree. Denisovans, named after the Denisova cave where they had first been discovered, had a unique signature in their DNA, showing that they were neither human nor Neanderthal. They lived as recently as 30,000 years ago, and like Neanderthals, our early human ancestors interbred with them. Today, Denisovan DNA is found solely in people living on the islands in Southeast Asia and Oceania, and is found highest concentrated amongst the native peoples of Papua New Guinea, who have up to 6% Denisovan-derived genes. The discovery of the Denisovans is a showcase example that there were other human species on this planet before we left Africa. 70,000 years ago, the people at Blombos Cave on the southern Cape Coast of South Africa were making beads strung together and worn out of shells, painted in ochre. Whilst 40,000 years ago in Germany, the Löwenmensch figurine or the lion mane of Hohenstein-Stadel was made, being one of the oldest examples of figurative art. Behavioural modernity is an anthropological term to describe the time period in which our early human ancestors finally started to behave like us. We as humans have the capacity for modern behaviour. We have things like culture, art, language, religion, and complex technology. If we consider complex technology, then behavioural modernity occurred 200,000 years ago. If we consider culture, however, our archaeological record extends up to 70,000 years with the development of beads and jewellery. 40,000 years ago, we see examples of our ancestors in full fling. The Venus figurines are an exemplification of fertility and abundance. Easter Island. Around 1,200 years ago, a mighty seafaring people traversed the far South Pacific Ocean, landing on islands so far off from civilization. Their migration to the distant lands would continue to baffle historians to this very day. Known by the locals as Rapa Nui, the inhabitants of this land claimed their arrival was met when their Polynesian king Hoto Matua traversed thousands of miles to arrive on the island in 1 or 2 large canoes with his wife and extended family. Besides the expert navigatory skills that these people possessed, their greatest legacy lies in the erection of over 900 mysterious giant stone statues, averaging 4 meters in height and weighing up to 13 tons. The people of Rapa Nui continued to settle the island for over 1,000 years until Europeans arrived. Their legacy from here on in remains a travesty, when 95% of their population perished over the years due to things like deforestation, disease, internal strife, and the slave trade. Yeah, I can. Named after the famous British explorer Captain Cook, the Cook Islands are a series of 15 islands dispersed over 2 million square kilometers of the Pacific Ocean. Cook Islanders are true Polynesians, connecting directly back to the finest seafarers of the Pacific. Sophisticated navigation took them fearlessly in search of new lands. The Cook Islands were settled over 1,000 years ago, and evidence suggests that the migrations came from Tahiti. Research suggests that the Polynesians left Tahiti because of infighting and wars possibly caused by overpopulation. For each group to travel and survive, they were oftentimes led by great warriors who are still mentioned in the folklore of the Cooks. Evidence for these ancient arrivals is shown by the Aramatua, an ancient road that runs around the span of Rarotonga. Closely linked in culture and language to the Maori in New Zealand, migrations to New Zealand began from Rarotonga as early as the 14th century. Today, 87% of Cook Islanders are Polynesian Cook Island Maori. 2010, beneath the rocky floor of Kaol Cave on Luzon Island in the Philippines, researchers uncovered the fossils of a previously unknown human species. The newfound teeth and bones combined both primitive and modern traits in a way that was previously never seen before. The new species was dubbed as Homo luzonensis, Luzon man. The bones date to at least 50,000 years ago, whilst the oldest activity on Luzon itself dates to around 700 to 600,000 years ago with the arrival of Homo erectus. Homo luzonensis was similar to us in certain ways, but at the same time it was very archaic, showing similar features to older members of our genus Homo. It had curved fingers and toe bones, suggesting that climbing trees was still an important activity for this human specimen. Homo luzonensis was also very short, only 4 feet tall. The discovery of Homo luzonensis adds another twist to our already complex human family tree. The more we find out, the more we realize how complicated this story really is. Homo naledi was fascinating. It had both advanced and primitive features. For example, it walked upright, very much like us, but like our chimpanzee cousins, it had curved fingers and toes, suggesting that it was adapted for a lifestyle in the trees as opposed to persistent hunting like our early ancestors practiced. What I personally find fascinating about Homo naledi is that it coexisted with a plethora of other members of our genus Homo. It goes to show that 200 to 300,000 years ago, the landscape of the world was very diverse and rich in members of other human species. Scientists will never know why so many Homo naledi bones were found in the D. naledi chamber. Some speculate that they were simply dragged in there, whilst others attribute a more ritualistic procedure, one where Homo naledi would drag its dead and place it into the chamber to rest in eternal glory. 65 to 50,000 years ago, the earliest Homo sapiens set foot in Papua New Guinea. The Earth's climate was very different to what it is now. An ice age lasting for tens of thousands of years connected Australian Papua into one gigantic island, known as Sahul. Today, Papuans are the direct descendants of the first Homo sapiens who traversed into this landmass. These ancient peoples have conserved in their cells more than any other human on the planet the traces of mankind's first journey to the edges of the world. Over the centuries, while other sapiens in Asia and Europe were intermixing, blurring the traces of their migrations, the genome of the first Papuans remained essentially intact, with a unique genetic heritage incorporating 2 to 4% Neanderthal and 4 to 6% Denisovan-derived genes. The Papuans are nothing less than a living record of our origins. The first Papuans and their descendants built an extraordinary complex of cultures. Over the millennia, some 800 different languages developed in New Guinea alone, accounting for 20% of all the languages spoken in the world. Hobbits really existed on this planet. As many of you know, I've been making videos on ancient humans for the past month or so. When I started looking at the folklore of people of Southeast Asia, Oceania, and the Pacific Islands, something really caught my attention. A small hobbit-like creature called Homo floresiensis once roamed the island of Flores some tens of thousands of years ago. Even more remarkable is that in 2010, another hobbit-like creature was found in the island of Luzon, dubbed Homo luzonensis. I find it absolutely remarkable how the folklore of these people mentions small little hairy people roaming the jungles. Ebugogo in Flores, Duende in the Philippines, Kakamora in the Solomon Islands, Jerawera in Australia, Veli in Fiji. The list goes on. Who are the Armenian people? Armenia, a land surrounded by mountains, was one of the first places humans settled when they left Africa. They are considered one of the ethnic groups of the Caucasus and were the first nation to adopt Christianity as a state religion. Calling themselves Haik, they have fought vigorously to protect their land, standing the test of time despite the dozens of invasions and massacres that have occurred for the past 2,800 years. The mountains in this part of the world offer protection from other civilizations. Their identity was formed after the Great Bronze Age collapse and were first mentioned in texts by the Persians as the satrapy of Armenia. Despite their valor, Armenians today have one of the greatest diasporas in the world, a result of the Armenian genocide which left up to 1.2 million Armenians dead. Who are the Georgians? I'm going to be as objective as possible here because I've actually been to Georgia and it was by far one of my most favorite countries to visit. Gamar Joba to my Georgian viewers. Located in Transcaucasia on the continental crossroads of Europe and Asia, the Georgians have been within this region for over 3,000 years. Many Greek myths such as Jason and the legendary Argonauts took place here. Nonetheless, the Georgians have witnessed many invasions, and their kingdom, which was one of the first to adopt Christianity, eventually saw its demise during the dark periods of the Middle Ages, caused by none other than the Putting death and destruction aside, the Georgians are one of the many ethnic groups of the Caucasus, and in fact the term Caucasian was named after them when German anthropologist Johann Blumenbach claimed that the Georgians were one of the most beautiful people in the world. They speak Khartouli, which is like one of the hardest languages to master, and I must say that I really did enjoy having Khachapuri and Khinkali when I was deep in the mountains of Kazbegi. Who are the Azeri people? Azerbaijan is a land surrounded by cold mountains, dry subtropical plains by the Caspian Sea, and it has the largest number of mud volcanoes found anywhere on the earth. It has a very old history, spanning from the Stone Age. Fast forward and the native people here, known as the Caucasian Albanians, not to be confused with the modern Albanians, were engulfed by the Persians, where it remained a part of their influence until the migration of the Ozturk tribes that began migrating in the 11th century AD. Today, modern-day Azerbaijanis are of mixed ethnic origin. Azeris are the second most numerous Turkic group after the Anatolian Turks, and speak a dialect of Turkish known as Azerbaijani Turkish, which is pretty mutually intelligible with the Turkish spoken in Turkey. The Azeri Turks are majoritively Shiites and have played an integral role in the world stage. For example, they formed the Safavid Empire of the Persians, and they've not only played an integral role in Azerbaijan, but also Iran, where they number up to 15 million people. The origin of the Punjabis. 65,000 years ago, the first humans left Africa and made their way into the Indian subcontinent. 10,000 years ago, farmers from southwestern Iran mixed with these hunter-gatherers and formed the ancestral South Indians, who would create the Indus Valley civilization. In the centuries after 2000 BCE came the second set of immigrants from the Eurasian steppe, known as the Aryans. These two cultures merged with one another to form a group called the ancestral North Indians, and the Punjabis are the direct descendants of the Sanskrit-speaking warriors. The original Blasians. The modern people of Madagascar are a mix of Southeast Asian and African genetics. Now you might think, how did people all the way from here make it to here? Well, 1,500 years ago, people from Southeast Asia made a 3,500-mile sea voyage to this island. 300 years later, people from East Africa came and mixed with the local inhabitants. Ancient eye protection. Snow goggles have been worn by the Inuit people for thousands of years to protect their eyes from the snow blindness the harsh Arctic climate causes. Traditionally made out of driftwood or bones, the workpiece is carved to fit the wearer's face, and one or two narrow slits are made to prevent an influx of light causing eye damage. Who are the Punjabis? The Punjabis are the 7th largest ethnic group in the world and are the modern descendants of the many different people that have once settled this rich region. The Punjab is the ancient centre of culture in the Indian subcontinent, and this is because it has been settled for a really long time. It was the primary geographical extent of the Indus Valley civilization, one of the first civilizations in the world. Upon the decline of the Indus Valley civilization, the region was inhabited by nomadic Indo-European tribes known as the Aryans. After that, the Persians, the Greeks, the Scythians, the Turks, and even the Afghans were amongst the many people who made their way into the Indian subcontinent, leaving their mark on this terrain. So as you may already know, I have covered the Punjabis, but I felt the older video wasn't comprehensive enough. I think I might follow through with this format of creating an initial overview followed by a more comprehensive breakdown like this. As always, if you have any suggestions, please shoot them down in the comment section below, and I'm looking forward to what region we're going to look at next. The prehistory of the British Isles. The earliest confirmed inhabitants of the British Isles were Mesolithic hunter-gatherers that made their way into Britain and Ireland around 10,000 BC. Reconstructions of Cheddar Man, a 10,000-year-old skeleton, show people with dark skin, blue eyes and curly hair. Around 5,000 years ago, the first farmers made their way to the British Isles, tracking a migration all the way from the Middle East. These early European farmers brought with them ceramics, cereals, cattle and the tendency for dark skin and dark eyes. 4,000 years ago, another wave of migrants made their way into the British Isles, this time from Eastern Europe, the Indo-Europeans of the Bell Beaker culture. Finally, around 300 to 500 BC, the Celts arrived into the British Isles from mainland Europe. Pacham woman, a 1,700-year-old resident of Roman Britain, is a representation of the modern Celtic populations that we see in places like Ireland today. Who are the West Africans? West Africa is a diverse place, and the people here tend to fall under three main linguistic families. We have the Afro-Asiatics, the Nilo-Saharans, and people of the Niger-Congo linguistic family. Despite the wide variety of cultures in West Africa, from Nigeria all the way to Senegal, there are general similarities in dress, culture, cuisine, music. This long history of cultural exchange predates the colonization era of the region, and the region has seen many great empires rise and fall, such as that of the Ghana and Mali empires. It has also borne witness to the atrocities of the transatlantic slave trade, which saw many West Africans being displaced from their homes. As a result, many North Americans, Caribbeans, and South Americans have a substantial amount of West African admixture in their DNA. This was a video request from my patron Jan, who requested we look into the region of West Africa. Who are the Kashmiris? Kashmiris belong to a macro group known as the Dardic people that inhabit the northern regions of India and Pakistan. They have up to 10 to 30% light-coloured eyes, and red hair isn't entirely uncommon either. Haplogroup R1a is prevalent in about 40% of Kashmiris, and this is indicative of the ancient Indo-European migrations that took place 4,000 years ago. In 200 BC, the Scythians, another Indo-European group, migrated into the area of Dagestan, forming the Indo-Scythian kingdom. Finally, the Indo-European Tocharians, who migrated as far east as China, may have also intermixed with the Kashmiri people. Now, no one is exactly sure who inhabited these areas prior to the migration of the Indo-Europeans, but there are clues. Now, the eastern region of Kashmir today is inhabited by the Ladakhi and Balti people who speak Tibetan languages, and the Burusho or Hunza people in northern Gilgit region who speak a language unrelated to any in the world may have been predominant in Kashmir prior to the migration of the. Who are the people of Bangladesh? Bangladesh is a melting pot of ancient cultures, and anthropologists have always noted the array of different people that exists within this region. The first settlers of the land seem to have been Austroasiatic groups, now represented by people such as the Shantal. Here's a map of the Austroasiatic languages so you can see their dispersal. At a subsequent age, people of two ethnic stocks seem to have settled Bengal, whose languages were Dravidian such as the Kurukh people, and Tibeto-Burman such as the Mama people. Finally, there seemed to have been a migration of Indo-Aryans in the 5th century, and today the Indo-Aryan languages are the most widely spoken in Bangladesh. A Greek-looking statue of Buddha in present-day Afghanistan? Sounds pretty out of place, right? Greco-Buddhism is a cultural syncretism of Greek and Buddhist culture. After the conquests of Alexander the Great, there was a lot of Greek influence left behind. Back then, the region of Afghanistan was known as Bactria, and this place highly embraced Buddhism until the Islamic conquests of 600 AD. Numerous works of Greco-Buddhist art display the intermixing of Greek and Buddhist influences. As we can see, the unification of different cultures gives rise to unique and beautiful artistic representations, and this idea still holds true today. Peace out. In the 1970s, two indigenous populations in South America were contacted and shown photos of different women from around the world. They were told to choose the women they found the most attractive. After choosing, they all universally chose the women with more baby faces, particularly East Asians as being the most attractive. Neoteny is the evolutionary idea of retaining baby face features throughout maturation. In humans, this has resulted in features such as having a large head, flat face, and a relatively hairless body. This is the reason why baby chimps look a lot more like humans as opposed to their adult counterparts. The reality is that our obsession with youthfulness is a hardwired criteria in our sexual selection. So the next time someone says you have a baby face, take it as a compliment. Your ancestors worked hard for it. Why do Filipinos look different to other East Asian populations? The island of the Philippines has been inhabited by hominins for more than 700,000 years. Homo luzonensis was an archaic hominid species that was found in the island up to 67,000 years ago and was only about a meter tall in height. Around 30,000 years ago, the Negrito populations made their way into the Philippines, and this can be represented by the Aeta people, who are the Aboriginal people of the Philippines. 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, the seafaring Austronesians made their way into the island and had mixed with the native people of the island. This presents us with the modern Filipino look and explains why Filipinos tend to have darker skin in comparison to their East Asian neighbours. We must also take into consideration that the Spanish had a significant impact on the island, and today about 3% of the average Filipino genome can be traced back to the Iberian Peninsula.
When sleep is sweetest, we rise at the bidding of a bell.
For millennia, the Eurasian steppe, a vast stretch of empty grassland, was dominated by nomads who lived and died upon the backs of their steeds. Historically reliable accounts describe these people as Iranic pastoralists, and for centuries, their dominion over the steppes would remain unchallenged. Herodotus relates a tale that the Scythians were born of a union between the demigod Hercules and a serpent woman. Meanwhile, the Sarmatians were known for the legendary strength of their women, and therefore were considered a product of a mixing between the Scythians and the mythical Amazonian warriors. But further to the north, a young, ambitious tribe was finding its bearings. These, of course, were the Slavs. For centuries, the brutalized Veneti, ancestors of the modern Slavs, were hemmed in by powerful neighbours. Unable to expand beyond their borders, a great migration occurred in the 4th and 6th centuries, forever changing the destiny of these people and the world we know today. Some tribes crossed the Danube into Eastern Roman territory, seizing lands for themselves in the Balkans and becoming the forebearers of the South Slavs. Some tribes ventured westwards into the domain of the Avars, carving a home for themselves and becoming the eventual predecessors of the Western Slavs. However, most important to our story are the tribes who ventured eastwards into modern Ukraine. The Scythian and Sarmatians, who for centuries had dominated the steppe, were weakened by centuries of war with the Goths, Romans and Huns. The Proto-Slavs sunk their roots into this unstable region, eventually assimilating the last remnants of these ancient people. These people in Spain and France speak a language that's unrelated to any language spoken on the earth. They live in a region known as the Pyrenees, and if you guessed that they were the Basque, then you, my friend, are absolutely correct. The Basque, or as they call themselves, Euskaldanak, are a pre-Indo-European population that exists within Europe, and I've actually been to Basque country and it was by far one of my most favourite places to visit in Europe. I'm going to play a snippet of Basque, and I'd love to hear in the comment section what you think this language sounds most similar to.
Kultura bat, tradizio batzuk, ez bakarrik Euskal Herrin. Gero ere bainei, benetan atentzio dituitena izan da, motivazioa daukatena, ikaslek, dala.
Special thanks to my newest patron Askew for supporting this channel, and a great big thank you to all my existing patrons. If you want to support Ancestral Brew, you can find a link to my Patreon in my bio. The Assyrians are one of the oldest ethnic groups in the world, having maintained a consistent history for more than 5,500 years. They are indigenous to the mountainous regions of modern-day Iraq, Turkey, Iran, and Syria, and are a true representation of the ancient Mesopotamians that once ruled this area. As a matter of fact, it's even attested that Jesus himself spoke a form of Aramaic, which is very similar to the language spoken by the Assyrians today. Unfortunately, similar to many other ethnic groups, they are at risk of becoming extinct due to the intentional annihilation of their history. But despite all this strife, their community is strong and have actively reignited their cultural elements. I will now play a sample of Syrian folk music for you so you can see the richness of this culture.
برتامي لبرتامي برتامي منابل عثام سردشت وكل عقوري